gentleman from California, Mr. Vargas, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you again for this hearing, and the ranking member, thank you very much. Chairman Powell, thank you very much for being here. We appreciate it. In fact, I was looking at your history when they were saying who nominated you, when you got here, and all that. In fact, you had public service even prior to that time, right?
That's right.
So I thank you for your long public service to the nation. I think
Thank
you've
you.
been outstanding. I think
Appreciate
we all
it.
respect you deeply here. You're pretty boring here today, to be frank.
Sorry?
You're pretty boring here, to be frank.
Thank you. That's a high compliment.
Yes, it is, because sometimes when you're here, there's all sorts of cameras here, and they're watching your every step and all. And I think there's a reason for that, right? And that's because the economy's doing all right. Am I wrong about that?
You know, take a look at our economy. We're growing at around 2%, it feels like. Inflation is down to 2.6%. Unemployment's at 4.1. These are good numbers.
Yeah, I mean, I hear the parade of horribles on the other side, how the sky's falling, but I don't see the media here to attest to that. In fact, it's just the opposite. Did you read some of the headlines of the new government in Britain? Some of the headlines? If not, let me read one. It says, "New British government inherits worst economic plight since World War II." And in fact, there's a number of headlines like that saying that England's in trouble. I imagine if you were running their central bank, I bet you there'd be a whole bunch of media here beating you up to find out what the hell you're doing or what you aren't doing. And I think the reason for that, again, is I think the government here has done a pretty darn good job. One of the things you said you didn't see coming was the pandemic, right? I'm not putting words in your mouth.
Right.
In fact, I was here and I heard the parade of horribles that we were going to have a recession, maybe a depression. In fact, the country was going to fall apart. Did it?
No. We went through a period of high inflation as the other countries did. And that's very challenging
And in
for
fact,
the people.
isn't it the case that most of those countries had higher inflation than we did in Europe?
Over time, there were times when their inflation was higher. I think
Yeah, it was.
overall it was broadly comparable.
Yeah, in fact, I brought it up a number of times here because there was a whole bunch of those countries that had much higher inflation than we did.
Well, Europe was much harder hit with the energy issues coming out of the Ukraine war than we were.
Sure. I mean, there's a whole bunch of other issues to instability. They had political instability, a whole bunch of other things, obviously. But, I mean, it is interesting today that, the parade of horribles that we hear doesn't seem to manifest itself with the media or the attention that you normally get. And that's good. I mean, I think that's a great thing. Now, I do want to ask a couple questions. I do have concerns, Basel III on housing. I think I've made those concerns known to your office, and I won't rehash them. But I do have issues that I want to talk to you about with regard to climate. Obviously, you said you don't read too much of the news. You didn't hear about Project 25. I don't think that's what you meant to say, and I don't want to put words in your mouth. I think when the ranking member asked you if you had heard about it, I think you said no. I think you've probably heard about it, but you haven't read it.
I've seen nothing more than headlines on it. I mean, I've devoted zero
Yeah, me too. I don't read
energy
that.
into.
Yeah, I don't read that wacky stuff myself either, but I certainly read the headlines. But the reason I ask about the headlines is because you obviously have seen what has happened in Texas. You've seen what has happened with climate change. And in fact, you've testified, I think, before that you believe in climate change. Is that correct?
Sure.
Yeah. And so what are we doing? You've taken a number of steps, I think, that have been very positive to make sure that we look at the risks of climate change. Could you go over some of those? Because that does concern me. I think that's a change that we also didn't see. Well, I saw it coming. I've been saying it for a long time, but a lot of people didn't believe.
So, if you're looking at financial regulators, you're looking at people who have a very, very limited role in climate, and that is just to look at the institutions that we supervise and make sure that they understand and can manage the risks that they're running. That we are not climate policymakers.
Right, and I'm not asking
It has to
that.
be elected people who do that.
Right, but you have to take a look at the risks. I mean, look at the risks that the insurance companies are taking, and the banks, of course, are financing these homes, and now you can't get insurance on them, so all of a sudden you can't rebuild. I mean, these are risks that the banks are looking
So
at.
we don't regulate insurance companies.
No, right, but you regulate the banks.
Thanks. Yeah.
And these banks have mortgages on those houses, do they not? Many of them.
Well, in many cases, they're not writing mortgages anymore. So that's the result we're getting, is that banks are saying, you know, they see these risks. They do.
My time's up, but thank you again. Appreciate you.
Thank you.